Come join the Common Sense Nation.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future.
Greetings! Welcome to Around the Curved Table, where we discuss things from the ladies' point of view. I'm Brenda, and this is my co-host, Gwen.
Hello.
We'll be talking a little bit about some news and etc. that we've heard about and different rumors. We'll hear a clip from the national anthem from one of our submissions that we received, and then we'll be talking with another person on our roundtable discussion. We'll be discussing the new Green Deal and climate change today. So, getting back onto the news that I had kind of seen earlier this week, it was kind of tied into that Jussie Smollett person, you know, and that headline one that was before, that this gentleman was in partnership with his lawyer. His lawyer was Marcus Gregos or something like that, and Michael Avenatti actually was being brought up on charges of bank fraud and extortion. I guess he was trying to extort people at Nike for money and other people in regards to that. And I think it's pretty sad when most people had heard about him before in the news when he was the lawyer for that Stormy Daniels lady that alleged, whatever against the president before. And so he was the lawyer for her and some other people that did allegations like that. And then also, he had this type of thing, and I know he had mentioned at some point that he was like, I'm thinking of running to be the president. I don't know if you heard that before.
No, that I didn't.
Yeah, so I mean, that didn't really go too far, but how the mighty have fallen. When you hear about such things like that, and
right.
then before with the whole thing with Stormy Daniels, and her suit against, President Trump, I know she had to pay for his legal fees because, the court sided with him.
Oh, they did? That wasn't in the news. I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, that was something that was there before. But separately, since I know you like to read, I had heard in New Jersey, some of the Democrats there were wanting the book banned, Huckleberry Finn, because of the theme that occurs in there. I don't know, for most people, growing up, at least when I was a kid, one of the books that you read was Mark Twain, in some of his books, and that's one of them in particular, that other than a nice movie that they put out in the past, there was the book. And it was because of, the theme with the slaves being
racial overtones.
Right, and see, the sad part about a story like that is that the book itself shows the hypocrisy and the, how ridiculous it is to have, that type of viewpoint of a different person.
Right.
And that was the one thing that's really good in that book, is that he befriends a runaway slave and tries to help him. So I think in some manners they're missing the point. That book, along with other books, which I'll discuss in a minute, I think, is a literary genius because of the fact that while you're reading the book, you have your heartstrings pulled by seeing how ridiculous it is to look at somebody as being different than yourselves, or less than somebody else, when we're all human beings created by God, and that we have equal rights by that. And like our Constitution, and and also the what is it called, the Declaration of Independence, these are things that, pretty much say that they're not giving us the right. They said we have a God-given right to be particular things.
Right.
And when you read in different literature, such as this book, it helps people to see the viewpoint, what was in the past. The only way you can stop history from repeating itself is to learn about history. If you destroy things that are historical, you cannot learn from those, and then people make the same mistakes in the future. Right. So when people try to wipe out statues, saying whatever, that a statue is, whatever, I don't really think that's the case. It serves as a reminder, just as if we have, for example, in Germany, they didn't get rid of Dachau and the different concentration camps, right? They're still serve as a memorial for the people and the hideous atrocities that went against the Jewish people and other gay people and whatever people that they separated slowly over time, because they first came for the Jews, and people didn't do anything. Then they came for the gay people, and then they didn't do anything. And then suddenly they came from them, and then they were worried. Well, you have to stick together as a group, and that history has shown that, no matter what that is. And we'll be talking about anti-Semitism and anti-Christianity later, but any anti, it's about separating people to make them lesser of a person and dehumanize them in the eyes of the public.
Right.
And that therefore dehumanize all of us while they're doing that. So I think it's not the best thing to do that. And then at the same time, when you think about such books, at that time, historically, there was hundreds and hundreds of people that were running the Underground Railroad.
Right.
And those people all had the same thought. It was only supposed to be 1.9% of all the people in America had slaves. Some of them were white people, and some of them were black people. It was about richness and them having crops and etc. But sadly, there is still slavery in the world. We see that in Muslim countries, where people are still considered slaves in their slave trades. That needs to be stopped. Luckily, we stopped that, but it is still part of our history. We can't throw history away because we don't like it. We have to learn from history. And so I don't think that's the best thing, getting rid of a book or banning a book because of that, because you're eliminating that story from people now. You want to say what mistakes were made in the past, and those were made, but to look and say, yes, that happened in the past, but that's not who we are, And that's not what our viewpoints are. And most of the people, like myself, my relatives didn't live in the country at that time. So how is it that it's all people of a certain whatever? You know what I mean?
Right. Well, when you think about it, the Irish.
Right.
The Irish were slaves. They were considered less than dogs.
Right. And
the Chinese.
Right.
I mean, all of these different things.
Right.
Throughout the world. It wasn't just one particular.
And it wasn't just
race.
In this country.
No.
So that's the thing. It was happening worldwide, and then on top of that, typically even warring cultures, whether you're indigenous cultures, when you fought and won against a different tribe or culture, the people that were took in, if they didn't slaughter you, often the females and the children were brought into their tribes or whatever to do different things, or be slaves. Same thing with any of the men that weren't dominant or that they didn't kill. They had the option of become a slave or get killed immediately. So that's part of an issue. And this also reminded me, when I said about another book, was the 12 Angry Men. It was a book.
Jury.
Yeah, it's about a jury, and it's about, I believe, it was about, I'm going from memory, so
corrected
give me some leeway. It's been a long time since I read the book. But from what I remember, I read it in high school, was that the dad in the story was a lawyer, and he was defending an African-American gentleman who had done something to people that had, I think, raped and violated his daughter, or maybe even killed his daughter. But I think it was just that they raped her, which is not a just. It's just in the story, that's part of the story. Okay. So he was defending him because he did an act of violence against the people that did this when he found out who they were. And so that was tied to the 12 Angry Men, because it's a jury. They're sitting on a jury listening to testimony on why this person did whatever. Like any father that would do. If your daughter was raped or possibly murdered, what would you do to the people that did this to you? And does it matter what the color of your skin is? And so I know in the story, he goes on and he tells the story to the jury when he's telling the story, and he's telling the story about a particular white girl, telling a story from that point of view, saying blah, 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 and all these horrible things that was done to her. And then he pretty much says, would it be any different if she was a different color?
Right.
And that helped them to have it hit them right here, because they envisioned their own kid going through that and what they would do. So, and then that was a story that's also, you know what? I think I'm telling you the wrong thing. I don't think it's 12 Angry Men. I think it's To Kill a Mockingbird.
I remember. Well, we can. Ready? And
no,
we can.
No, you're fine. No, that's fine. It's okay. But it doesn't matter that I, had the wrong book. You're going from memory. That's why I said I'm trying to go from memory. It could have been To Kill a Mockingbird, and I read both of them. So sadly, I know that they mentioned it before in the news, and it's been several months. But I remember hearing about that, so it doesn't matter about that.
Brenda actually corrected herself. The book
other than
is
that,
A Time to Kill.
I had heard recently that there was additional Clinton emails that were found on, that weren't submitted. When she testified under oath, that she submitted all of her emails, and that they came out before in the past, with how many, they said, I can't remember how many Comey had said on the thing, X amount of, classified emails were found, and they, poo-pooed that. But recently, in the last few weeks, more emails have been found through Judicial Watch, putting in a FOIA request.
Oh.
So these were not in the emails, even though it was said that all the emails were turned in to them. So that wasn't really good. So they were able to recover a fifth of the 5,000 emails,
From the bathroom server?
Yeah, from the bathroom server. So, but that's just adding to the past stories that we kind of talked about a little bit in the past. Mm-hmm. But in Illinois, and I know some other states have been doing the same thing. Some counties within Illinois, not Cook County, of course, have been passing anti Second Amendment banning legislation. So you know how they're becoming gun sanctuary cities.
Okay.
So in case the state of Illinois passes any gun bans,
I see
their counties will not comply with those. Okay. And there's if you look at most of the state, most of the southern parts of the counties in Illinois have went to the sanctuary gun policies.
Okay.
And it's starting to spread more, but that's definitely been the case because in the news has been the wanting to put forth a couple of things. One, always the push is trying to ban guns, right. And then the red flag gun laws, where Illinois already has that ridiculous law where it says that somebody can just call and put in a complaint and they, despite them not looking into anything, they can just ban you from having your gun for so long, etc., because someone's worried about your mental state.
Right.
So does that mean I can use that loophole this way? I want to bother my ex whatever.
Right.
And I know they have protection against them, so I have someone put a complaint out against them saying under that red flag law.
Who's to say they couldn't do that?
They can't defend themselves, and now I can go and attack them. They don't
right.
have a way to defend themselves with their gun.
Right.
I can overpower them.
Well, and then you had toxic masculinity as a mental health disease.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. So just with the red flag gun laws, right. I know that was something that was being viewed at recently, and then other states have been passing similar things, which is going against our Second Amendment rights,
Right. One of the things that I was recently circulating on the internet was that reminder from Charlton Heston, which was a NRA commercial more. Mm-hmm. He basically was on there reminding us that this uprise mm-hmm. in what's going on in our country with the gun safety legislation, different ways that they're going to word it, or that they're going to try and get more and more people behind to take away our Second Amendment. All of these things are partly our fault.
Oh, how so?
Because we as American citizens we're constantly making excuses about guns. About, well, this particular gun I only use for hunting. This particular gun I only use, like his big thing, it wasn't just for home defense. It wasn't just for hunting. It's the Second Amendment is there to protect us from our government.
Right. From a tyrannical government.
Right, and for it's our fault for not instilling that into our children of the next generation, of at least showing them the same, not making an excuse for it, where it seems that that's the situation. The individuals start to point particular guns out and say, well, that one's really not covered by the Second Amendment. They don't mean assault weapons. They don't mean these things. Well, does your government have assault weapons? So the whole point is about the equality of you keeping from having a tyrannical government take right. over.
If they have a machine gun, then you're not, and you have a bolt action rifle. Right. It's going to be hard to compete against that.
Right. So in that regard, that made sense. I thought of how many times that we as individuals are looked at, or especially as grown women, many of the children, the young teenagers coming up, They look to us for information. They look to us in a curiosity stance. All these topics shouldn't be swept under the rug. These are items that we should talk about. That where they talk about them in school now. So why wouldn't we have these discussions not just around the table, but actually at home,
right,
about the importance of the Second Amendment in general in our lives.
Right. Well, when you said about schools, I know I've heard stories on the internet where they say one of the things was telling kids that they should collect up their parents' gun and bring it into school or whatever. I was like, what? You know what I mean? What a way to get kids killed. Other than that, I believe in some medical questions in some states I've heard that that's a question that people are asking. Do you have a gun in your house? When you're getting asked about your medical history and etc., your doctor's office is asking whether or not you have a gun. And you know what I mean?
Right.
What right is that for them to ask that? How does that apply to anything regarding your HIPAA information?
That's a great point, but I believe they've been asking that question for probably the last 10 years.
Right.
It's a matter of whether you choose to answer that or not.
Right, exactly.
A lot of people choose not to answer that question.
Exactly.
And
but still,
in your own personal, a lot of
that's pushing an
individuals say that out
agenda
loud.
right there, is asking that question. It's a right.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a privilege. It's a right given to us, just like the First Amendment, our right to speak. You know? So, and we live in the United States for a reason. I mean, and in regards to the defense, you should have that ability to defend. But when people try to argue against being able to have the Second Amendment right, saying it's dangerous for other people, well, there's a lot of ways to kill people. I think we've mentioned before is that I could kill people with a car. People can bomb people. They can knife people. Look at the UK. They don't allow,
Don't they have a little box now that says turn in your knives here?
Right.
As opposed to just turn in your guns here now.
Right.
Turn in your knives here.
Right, exactly. So
cut off your hands and put them in the box.
Well, yeah, understandable. It's just like that same thing. They don't have guns. But still knife attacks are happening. So now that they don't have guns, they're still having problems with knives. Now they're encouraging people to turn in their knife. The problem is not the weapon.
Right.
The problem is the person and their thinking.
What's the phrase? Guns don't kill people, people kill people?
Right. It's that same type of deal. If you're driving your car and texting or something and you cause a, problem and you kill somebody, that's because of you. The car didn't do it. Your phone didn't do it. You did it.
Right.
So it's not a good thing, but.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So, and that's, a big issue. In regards to that, because a lot of people aren't paying attention to that, and that is in the news a lot. And so you want to make sure when you hear about such things that you speak up.
This is my favorite segment, Brenda.
What is that?
Share your voice, share your spirit, show us your patriotism.
Patriotism is not a bad word.
Exactly, it's not. Today. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, who do we have today? When?
I was excited. Today we have a young lady by the name of Michelle.
Okay.
And Michelle is going to be doing her rendition of the national anthem for us.
Can't wait to hear it, Michelle.
We can't wait. I wonder, what are you wearing during this? Do you have the little hat on? Do you have the little streamers in her hair? How could she have this much patriotism in her voice?
I don't know. I guess we'll listen and find out.
Thanks, Michelle.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Woohoo!
Way to go.
Great job, Michelle.
Loved it. Michelle, you did an outstanding job. I'm very, very lucky to have that version this week.
I'd agree. Couldn't have done it better myself.
One of the things to remember is we're always looking for submissions. If you have your rendition of the national anthem, go ahead and send it in to us at GwendyAroundTheCurvetable.net. That's Gwendy at AroundTheCurvetable.net, and we might play it on the show. Brenda's making a request that she'd love to hear it on the spoons.
Sure. That's why I said play it out however you like to,
Whatever.
Guitar, whatever. Piano, spoons, I'm happy to hear it.
Just show us your patriotism.
So, I don't know if you've seen the other day that Judge Jeannie Pirro came back on to Fox News after that whole episode there.
Wonderful. That's wonderful to hear.
Did you hear about, that before, why she was kicked off and everything?
I did hear about that she had made some... she actually talked about some of the truths about extreme Islam and Sharia law,
Right.
And a lot of individuals rose up and bound together to get her off the air.
Right, and so that's the same type of thing that, we kind of talk about, where you got to make yourself vocal. And so,
Right.
And I know a lot of conservatives really appreciated her actually speaking her mind.
Right.
And getting that word out there that, that's not something that they agree upon, that anti-Semitism and anti-whatever is not a good thing. And so trying to push, Sharia values and laws into place
Right.
is not,
When, as I understand, when topics like female genital mutilation come up and honor killings, and individuals say, you can't talk about those such things, when those are actually part of their core values in that extreme mentality.
Right,
or
and that's the
ideology.
thing. Anytime you have an extreme, mentality, then you're on that edge,
Right.
But if people from within that religion that don't believe that need to speak up, because if you don't, then it's that same thing where silence is consent, So
Right.
if you want people to be on your side, then you have to realize that, if people are on that such extreme thing that they need to, and they don't believe in that, then
Right.
they need to be vocal within their own community and let them know that, hey, that's not something from that is supported by like ISIS or
Right.
Al-Qaeda in a different country, and
Right.
extreme values isn't something that we want here in the U.S. Also, we want peaceful existence, etc.
Right.
If that became a movement within the Muslim
Right.
community, then less people would view particular things like
Well,
that.
one of the points that came up just the past couple of months with, I believe, is Ilhan Omar's remark or tweet that definitely had a anti-Semitic slanting to it. The Middle Eastern Women's Coalition band together ended up bringing forth the committee trying to get her. They actually went to Washington, D.C. and said she needs to retract that. She needs to, she should actually be removed
Right.
from her position. So, like you said, those ladies are essentially putting their words into action. And that's
Right.
what we need to do.
That's the thing. If you don't support that, then you need to be vocal. And
Right.
that would be the same thing if it was a Christian thing. If someone
Right.
was like way off the deep end, like those cult things,
Right.
You
I
wanna,
see what
you
you're-
want to say that's not us, and get your word out there.
Right, exactly. Well, another thing that was in the news this week was or this past few weeks, was that the movie Unplanned.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see that? A little bit about the history on that one. The individual, I believe she was the director. I know she was pretty high up in a particular abortion clinic. And for her, she had her own revelation, and it explains why she ended up changing she changed her position, not only her position and her ideology of thought, but she also changed her job.
Okay.
And she's no longer working for that particular clinic, and now what she's actually done, I believe it's in the last 10 years. There was an incident that happened while she was at work. She said that for many employees in that industry, they were taught a particular way of thinking, that especially fetuses didn't have feelings, or couldn't actually feel.
Okay.
From their nerve endings. They couldn't actually feel at certain weeks. And she had an experience that she was called in to assist during an abortion, and she actually witnessed the fetus trying to escape, move away, and as it was being torn apart and writhing in pain. So she talks about her own personal experience, how it changed her, how she made a lot of enemies, but she's also, she said, just because I did this, she said, just because this might be in my past, or this might be in your past, or your husband's past, or anyone's that made that decision, she said, it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to call this out now, where for her, she switched positions, and now she actually finds all these individuals, hundreds of workers from the abortion industry. She helps them find new jobs.
Well, and that's the thing, is with anything, we can't change what we've done in the past.
Right.
But we can change what we can do in the future and try to influence people in a positive way.
Right.
To see the errors that you've learned by yourself, So that's great to see. And I'm glad to hear that that's the case for this movie. I had heard in regards to the movie that they were trying to have it be R-rated, but the people that made the movie were hoping for more like of a PG-13 type of rating, because they wanted it to be more available to people of all different ages and etc. But I'll stop expounding on that because I hear that sound coming.
Oh, do you hear it?
Yep.
Oh, wonderful. We hear the medieval music. Special thanks to Tristan Lagerhen for his beautiful rendition of the medieval intro. If you'd like to hear more of his music, you can click on the link below.
And don't forget, we're going to be watching and meeting up with some other ladies in the Round the Curve table. We'll be talking about the New Green Deal.
New Green Deal.
So let's go to that section now.
Let's head over.
Here we are, Around the Curve table. Great to see you with Gabrielle this week.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Today we have some, Brenda was excited about this one.
Oh yes, definitely about the New Green Deal and climate change. And that's been in the news recently with, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had introduced the legislation. And so there was a lot of talk on it for both sides, so that's been big in the news. One of the things that was kind of mentioned in regards to that this is kind of a rehashing of what the UN initiative they also call theirs the New Green Deal. So that's something that, a few of the people have mentioned that in the past, the UN came out with some of these same things, as part of their things that they'd like to get out there. So when the people that support her say this is new and that they came up with it, that's not really the case, that they're kind of like snipped out parts of the UN report of sustainability and control of different countries economically utilizing their new Green Deal thing. So they're not really the authors, but they're actually, plagiarizing their report partially.
Oh, wow.
So I think that was one of the things that I had heard. Other than that, economists have talked about this, and that that this is partly them trying to restructure the U.S.'s economy. Because if you think about right now, what are some of the biggest things that make money within the U.S.? Oil and gasoline, petroleum products are a big industry, right? And even though we do have the solar technology and the wind technology, they're not as clean as they would like them to be. And, because, for example, the wind turbines that, do create power also need to be oiled, and sometimes there's oil spills on the farmers' lands or other lands from these turbines. And then same thing with the metals that are having to be used in solar panels to create those, there's the processes that have to go through for those to switch to a new technology. But even one of the people that I heard was against it was one of the original co-founders of Greenpeace, which was a Patrick Moore. And he was like, when he looked at the deal, he said how ridiculous it was. I mean, he's like, the co-founder of Greenpeace, which is really a big advocate for, a green world and us making sure that we don't lose species and we move towards a greener world. But he was like, the feasibility of this is impossible when you try to say that you're going to get rid of all cows. He's like, what's wrong with a cow? I mean, granted, yes, they make methane, but so do how many other animals. But in order to do that, you have to change and create a food source for all the people around the world that rely on that as a food source. If not, you're making them turn into cannibals. And that's the only way they're going to survive. You're going to want to, if you eliminate all cows within this small time period that they wanted this to put in place, you have to have something else. So if not, you're going to have millions of starving people around the world because you're not replacing that food source, and people will need to turn into cannibalism, and we've already seen like Venezuela and other areas where people have starved when there's not enough food. So he was mentioning about that, and he's like, this would lower the world's population from 7 billion down to a way smaller number in a short amount of time because there's just not enough food. He's like, just that alone, by them implementing that, would, make it not sustainable unless you only want a handful of people still left on the earth.
Right. Well, Gabrielle, are there any points that you wanted to make on the Green New Deal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made an amazing point. I mean, just the lack of feasibility is a huge point. Another aspect of it that's really troubling is the call to do with gas-powered cars and doing away with air travel. And it's interesting because the Green New Deal, they say it'll help lift people out of poverty. Like, what about people who work in manufacturing industry, or people who work in air travel? I mean, how do people get to places they need to be? I mean, there's so much to the Green New Deal that doesn't make sense. And then there was also talk about people who are unwilling to work. And to me, that, I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that part? You kind of cut out.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. There in the Green New Deal, there was talk about providing economic aid to people who are unwilling to work. And that is literally socialism. And I don't understand how Democrats towards something so radically far left. Even some of the more moderate people saying that, hey, this is just not, this can't happen for reasons.
For practical reasons, I totally agree with you. That's some great observations there. You mentioned it still sticks with me when they talked about the elimination of planes and these other forms of travel. I know about the particular high-speed trains. And well, for one thing, let's all be excited that recently it was voted down. So I think that had a lot to do with Representative Mike Lee, I believe is his name, who, did you see that with the, it was like a Tyrannosaurus Rex with Ronald Reagan over his back holding a flag. Did you see that? YouTube video? Right, and he made references to like the feasibility of it. He talked about, instead of using these ideas, we could actually use tauntauns to get around in Alaska, where he talked about, obviously Star Wars references and things like that. It was brilliant. If you, if you guys didn't see it, it's definitely a treat. And where for me, during the tension I could feel during the past couple of weeks that we were just discussing this, that this would actually come up in actual conversation, that it was nice to have that little bit of levity to make you laugh,
Right, and going to your point about even manufacturing, we already know how the U.S. and Detroit and other big cities around the U.S. have been decimated, and high incidence of unemployment and all the other things that go along with those things, just with like the past like NAFTA agreement, not regarding this. And if we can think of all the companies just moving out of the country to get, free trade with us and not having to pay tariffs, etc., and moving their plants to Mexico, that alone as an example, let's say, we know what happened with manufacturing being stopped of cars in Detroit, and look at the poverty that occurred. Picture all these different manufacturing jobs for, as you mentioned, that's just making this bigger headache. That's not making the economy better. And you're just making people more poor. Unless you have something already in place that they can do other than giving them money. I mean, like you said, they're wanting to just, let's just do a socialism program. And we got rid of your job and we're not going to give you a skill. We're just going to give you money. People, it's one thing to help people up when there's a time of need. But you know what? There's pride within yourself doing something and loving what you do, no matter what that is. And that's not part of the socialism thing, There's that line, teach a man to fish and he can catch fish every day. But if you just give him fish, he doesn't, do more than that. It's you're not building self-sustainability. So you'd have to have something in place for that. And then for the planes, you'd get rid of planes. I mean, yes, there's a lot of pollution that come out of planes, but they, from what I understand, that one volcanic eruption does more for many years of plane rides in one volcanic eruption. So just because the emissions that they put out into the air. So you can't do away with that. Therefore, that's a larger input actually to the our ecosystem and our atmosphere. From the emissions from volcanism, volcanoes, which go off, all the time around the world, so that's kind of far-fetched. But then the trains, I mean, you can build those trains, but still, what are those trains being ran on? Are they only on solar? Most trains nowadays are dual. They're run by a diesel engine that powers batteries, and the engine is actually an electric engine. So we do have those hybrid engines already in trains, but we'd be getting rid of the motor that actually charges the train. So you'd have to have your solar technology up to the ability to provide that electricity, because they don't want nuclear power either. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to get rid of nuclear plants and coal burning plants across the country, just if it was for the US. And right now, those provide the bulk of our electricity. So that means if you were going to have a train, it's got to run on they're proposing that it's going to run on electricity. Well, you have to have the technology already there to run it on electricity. And nobody has that technology. If you think of Japan, they have fast trains, but they're still running that electricity on a different thing. It's not being generated by solar currently. So, but in some manners, when I think of, no planes, only trains going different places, and then no cows, it's separating us kind of into those things that I picture, like the Hunger Games movie, where you live in zones. There's all these spots that you cannot go. You're not allowed to go. And you have to just live in your little packed area with people and just do your little job that we tell you to do. And you're just going to accept that. It reminds me of that kind of mentality.
Okay. I see what you're saying. Well, I also understand the one of the other factors to consider was that the proposed bill for this was at least $1 trillion, but they said it was $100 trillion. They said that it was actually too hard to put a price tag at this point. So, and this would also be something that our country would only be the ones following. So how are you're only changing it in our country, not around the world, so we would be the ones that would be changing our entire infrastructure of all the buildings to accommodate this. So they talk about this grand plan for tackling climate change. It's dependent on how you see things as far as climate change. The way that whether individuals will agree that there is a actual change that is being man-made, or that is being affected by us, or compared to the generations before us, if we're actually making this big imprint, or if it is, or if it's something that's been blown out of proportion. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask Gabrielle. Obviously, you're of a different generation from us. So looking at what you've learned growing up and the education that you have is a little bit different than I've had in my education, which was set back another couple decades. I wondered what your viewpoint is on, the premise of that, about the climate change. I mean, we all know, that the climate fluctuates and et cetera. But what is your thought on that?
Absolutely. I do have climate change. I do think that there could be certain things that we are doing that might be impacting the climate. But at the same time, I do believe that climate has always kind of changed. It's like you'll hear about global warming, but then 2 weeks later, it'll be like below freezing in Michigan. Like, I have relatives in Michigan who say like it's freezing cold here. Like it's beyond ridiculous how cold it is. So some people have concerns about climate change, but ultimately I do kind of lean towards being slightly skeptical about it, simply because of the fact that the climate change has always gone up and down, and like to your point, it's always fluctuated to some degree.
Right, and I would agree that. And then even there's, historically, we know, from the core samples and different things that have been looked at, that we've had ice ages and hot periods and et cetera. So that's definitely something that's known. And I know, back probably when my parents grew up, they were talking about the next ice age and how it was global cooling. That was the fear. And then I'm sure it didn't help that Al Gore, back in whatever year that was, the 90s, had said 20 years from now, blah, 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 these predictions. And here we are way past that deadline. And we're still, not having those issues. So that's not helpful when you're trying to prove a theory. But we also have to realize that what also controls our climate is that big bright thing in the sky, that sun. We know, the sun goes through periods of solar flares, and then right now we're in the solar minimum. So that typically means, cooler climates across the continents. And I know I've seen an article not too recently where they were saying before some glaciers had been shrinking in the past, and now they were growing back at the same rate they had been shrinking. So that says that, we don't know what's going on. And, we don't want to panic people. But at the same time, when they talk about CO2, I don't know about you, but I think of I exhale CO2. Does that mean less people need to be on the earth? Is that what they're trying to push? Or what loves CO2? Plants. Plants take that CO2 in and use it and exhale oxygen. So usually, if you think of we're in a system in the world where oxygen and CO2 aren't leaving our atmosphere. They're staying within our atmosphere. We're a closed system. So when we have CO2 rise, typically in the past, plant life has rose too to meet the demand because there's more nutrients in the air, Okay. So there's some people that argue that same thing, that, CO2 itself is not bad because it's a building block for green things, and plants, so I don't know.
Well, I'm going to go off and talk about the elephant in the room.
Okay.
When it comes to climate change,
mm-hmm.
To me, over the past couple of decades, we've been so scared into believing climate change is real, that if you go online, do your own research, and you actually look up, it's called geoengineering, you can actually find that individuals have taken upon themselves, possibly from our government, that they've taken upon themselves, because those are the same people that have these patents, they've taken upon themselves to actually begin spraying the skies as a way to possibly, there are different reasons why, but they talk about more to blot out the sun, to control it themselves, to actually geoengineer. So if everyone would kind of do their own homework, everyone says, well, you look up in the sky and you see those are contrails, those aren't chemtrails. Everybody make your own decision. But when I was a little girl, I actually had blue skies. They were blue all the time, Gabrielle. It wasn't, they didn't dissipate. So there's an amazing site from Dane Winnington. People from all around the world go on there, and some of these particulates that end up raining down on us are examined, and the tracings, and they've actually broken it down on what these particular things are. So at this point, there's so many different ways to say, well, climate change isn't real. Climate change is something thought up, but climate change perhaps a decade ago wasn't real, but now I believe that somebody is actually changing the puzzle pieces around and it's becoming real. So it's not because of our carbon footprint or what we were doing, it's because this is being geoengineered to change the climate. Look at the campfires. Look at the horrendous campfires in California. that's a topic for a whole other day. We could go on.
Before, when I mentioned about the gentleman from Greenpeace, he had also mentioned we eliminate all these fossil fuels. You picture natural gas that you run out of your, most people light their stoves with in the US, or else you also use like propane or whatever. If you were to get rid of this to keep up the demand for heat in people's houses and cooking, you would have to cut down all the forests in the world. To keep up with that demand. So that alone's not, bad. So I'm glad that it didn't, pass, but that's just another example of, in order to get rid of particular things, you have to have something in place that's going to be a beautiful substitute for that. If you got rid of cars, well, that's fine. In the past, we didn't have cars. We can go with other means of transportation if we really wanted to do that as a country, but we would need horses, right? Most people still want to travel and go different places now. It's not like back 100 plus years ago when people just lived in their little tiny community and they didn't go other places. People know and want to experience the rest of the world around them. So if you did eliminate those cars, then you have to go back to the other means of transportation, a bicycle, right, on foot, or a living animal. But then there's some people that are against you having domesticated animals, so, and then isn't that additional animals that are adding out methane, so.
Right. Well, one of the other things on the internet they had talked about with the Green New Deal was they said that there was so much misinformation on the internet on this particular subject that and AOC ended up blaming it on the fact that, I believe she ended up blaming it on, she said that the sponsors and the media that were excited to get the plan, and they took a draft and put that on the internet, so that information was out there. But one of the rumors of this misinformation was that they were going to actually use men's urine. They were going to have men urinate into a milk jug. Did you hear that one?
No, I didn't hear that one.
And make their own coffee. So again, it was a rumor, though. It was, thank goodness it was a rumor, but it still sparked. I believe it went viral. So the idea that something like that, whether it's misinformation on her side or misinformation from the opposite, it's just a matter of always double check your facts. But yeah, that was something.
Well, if you want to make things more green, like without legislation, I mean, everybody kind of knows things that they could do themselves to help improve things. You know what I mean? Buy locally, right? Don't buy stuff from, out of the country, because then it doesn't have to be shipped to here. You know what I mean? I mean, if you can buy it from the local store down the street, why, have it buy from a big company like Amazon or whatever. You promote local business, right? And then it's not being shipped, which is less pollution by trucking or whatever.
Okay.
So I know some towns, not so much the Green Deal per se, but have said that if you really want to be more sustainable, you could start your own garden. You can buy local from farmers that are in the area from you, because they're not, the food's not being shipped into your area.
Right.
Anytime you reduce the amount of shipping, that's going to reduce amount of pollution. But, it's just like little things that everybody could do if they wanted to, feel better about what they're doing. But
I always do that little one. I hate to jump in here, but
go ahead.
I have to sometimes throw up signs to myself so I don't forget it.
Oh, you're talking about clipping?
Clipping. Do you do that too? You clip it so the little fishies don't get caught inside of a 6-pack or something?
Yeah, I've definitely done that a lot.
That's so when you say about the helping every day, I'm
Right.
Those are the little small things that leap into my mind.
Right, and that's the thing is you can do particular things, but also some of the practices we've switched to. I mean, before you used to, everything was glass. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's true.
You used to get a refund when you brought the bottles back, and I can remember as a kid, you'd be like, "Oh, I'm gathering up all the bottles because I'm going to get my little, deposit back, and how much money am I going to get?" Or you could look for bottles, to turn in, and you would get a few, some money back, and it used to pay you to, turn in aluminum cans and etc. But now it's not really worth it, So that also helps to spread more trash if you're not having like some incentive. Because before with the bottles, people knew if they collected them, they bring them back, they get money back, they paid it already. Yes. In the price of whatever the food was. But if you brought it back and recycled it, then, there was that cost offset. So you at least got it back, where now it's kind of like, for example, milk jugs, they're plastic. So they're being, unless you recycle it, and most, it still has to go through more of a process than what a glass bottle did that wasn't broken, before, like the Coca-Cola or the milk glass milk things.
Right.
They just wash them, decontaminate them, and reuse them. They weren't having to melt them down, do additional processes to make them into a new product. So, I get where people want to be more environmental, but this legislation wasn't really about that. It was more about economic control, and then just putting something in place like that, which would change us more into a socialist nation.
I completely agree. I mean, we all have kind of homework. Thank you so much for joining us, Gabrielle. You were an amazing guest. We appreciate you. Where can we listen to or catch you? Catch some of your writings? USA Herald, USAHerald.com?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, we'll look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being a guest again. We greatly appreciate it.
We appreciate it. And we'll see you around the curb table.
See you.
So a little bit about some of the news that I was kind of disappointed in this week when I heard that the Senate totally voted down President Trump's national emergency, especially with some of the totally ridiculous national emergencies that have been passed in the past by like President Obama. He did that one, what was it, for the bird flu? Woo! Because it was a national emergency, we might all die from the bird flu. Never happened, but this is something that you can actually put your hands on and see numbers, and you've seen people where they interview some of the personnel that work down there, and they're showing all the human trafficking that's going on down there, all the people that are getting, physically assaulted at the border, people's properties being trespassed, people with guns going, onto their property, beating up people. Some people come home and there's someone sleeping in their bed because, they're crossing the border illegally, some there. And then there's the drugs. I mean, it's just really sad when you hear stories about people sending their kids and they know that they send their kids with birth control and etc. because they know along the path they're going to be raped. So that way they at least don't get to the U.S. and be pregnant. It's just sad.
God, I didn't know that.
So that's just one of those horrible things. So, I mean, how is it we can protect other people's borders? Like, our military has been deployed around the world to protect other countries, but they can't, protect our own borders here.
Right.
Without borders, we don't really have a country, and I have to wonder if that's what, that the whole issue is, What do you think?
I completely agree. I think the idea that you go to any other country in the world, they specifically have lines. They have borders. They many of them have fences. Many of them have stop points before you can even get into their country.
Right.
What were passports created for?
Right.
If not this sort of thing. The idea, to me, the idea is just insane. It boggles the mind when you think about the fact that people actually want to prevent it's not that they want to prevent individuals from coming into the country. To them, their big thing is they want the illegal voices to come into the country because then it can be controlled. It can be, look what we gave to you.
Right. Well,
that's the way I see it.
Yeah, and I'd agree that especially recently with the Congress passing that illegal aliens can vote in local elections, that just supports that totally.
That's absolutely ridiculous. And then
what other country can you go to and vote in their elections? Nowhere.
That's true. And go a step further. Now the census says you can't actually ask individuals, are you legal in this country?
Well, if you want to give people the right to vote, why wouldn't you want to know how many people are able to vote? So you'd have that. If you're usually when they count the numbers, it helps them to get seats, right? How many people are in each seat. Now, if you were in LA, let's just say, and especially since that's been a hotbed in the past, even if you think of those old Cheech and Chong movies, where they're like, I got my green card or I don't got my,
I'm from East LA.
Exactly. That same kind of deal. So most people know in that area, there's a lot of people that are illegal. So why wouldn't they want that number counted? So that way they could say, hey, my constituency, especially since you just voted to give these people the right to vote in local election, is X amount of people that are citizens and X amount of people that aren't citizens. That way you would know that number.
Right.
Maybe is it because they're afraid to know what that actual number is? Because we don't know how many people have crossed the borders. There's estimates from the DHS on how many people that cross the border, but that's still a rough number. How many people flew under the radar and are coming in, not just along our south border, coming in from boats, coming in from Canada,
right,
etc.
I completely agree.
Other than that, talking about the House, I noticed that there was something that Nancy Pelosi mentioned this week.
Well, let me go back just a second because, like you said, that the Senate vote rejected it, but our president came along and vetoed it. Big thing.
Yeah, so President Trump vetoed it, so we'll see how it goes forward because in order to override that, they need a lot more votes. There were some videos going on online where people were showing that different news stations from around the country running the same wording,
exactly
through their stories.
The same wording.
So they were showing the different video clips of CBS, NBC, all different types of media stations that were just saying exactly the same words. So that kind of ties in with that when people are like, no, that's not happening. How do hundreds of news agencies around the country say exactly the same wordings if they're news stories that they wrote themselves? The likelihood of even three of them writing the same words.
I got to jump in here on that one. It amazed me when they said 7 new types of cloud formations, 7 new types of cloud formations, 7 new types of cloud formations. And when you break it down, the Latin of those cloud formations was actually talking about man-made clouds. Their whole thing was, again, that's a topic for another day.
Right.
Blue skies. When I was a child, I know blue skies. That's not what I see now.
Wow.
But again, topic for another day.
Right, exactly. So, but it's still about the wording. So,
right.
The likelihood that two people have a conversation and say exactly the same thing.
They were even saying happy birthday to the same person at the same time on 30 networks.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was absolutely ridiculous. So yes, they definitely had they set the narrative for their own personal agenda, and then they just twist the media and the idea that our mainstream news or our mainstream news is not allowed to, they specifically regulated what those people were to say. Everybody else they just call alternative media.
Right. Well, the thing is, a lot of them use teleprompters, and there's a teleprompter company out there that helps to feed those things,
That's
whether it's
point.
Avid or a different teleprompter company, so if you're using the same software that's prompting your words, you can easily have the same language.
Right.
So one of the things that I had noticed was that everybody's kind of talking about recently is the 737 MAX planes that were crashed. There was 2 crashes recently. So a lot of countries were stopping their planes from flying. And I know that, the FAA and the president had, wanted any of the 737s to stop flying. And I know I've seen different people that were interviewed, they were asking them what they thought, so some of the people are like, well, who cares? It's just, another plane. Just because 2 crash doesn't mean that they're going to crash, here. They might not just be being taken care of as much. But I know that the black boxes from those planes, that they were going to send them over to France and review what actually occurred prior to the thing. So they were just doing it as a safety thing. But those are the Boeing 737s.
I heard about that. Yeah, unfortunately, like a horrible tragedy. But to me, I still have to delve a little bit deeper into this one. But what about the maintenance of these planes? These are in some countries that may not have the most amazing.
Right. Well, some of the 2 are from Indonesia and Ethiopia, so they may not have the care that's going into it. And you don't know what they came across on their flight, or if they're maintained at the same yard or something.
Right. Yeah, that's some great points. The idea that how long was the span that these 2 fell out of the sky?
Well, I thought it was within the same week and a half or something. So,
okay. Well, the idea that so many of those are actually flying around,
right?
When
right.
I know, I understand. A lot of people say, "Let's ground them,"
right?
But that's that's people's bread and butter. That's that's a hell of a lot of. That's a huge thing to, without having all the information.
Right.
I think it's a huge leap.
Right. Well, and I know some of that, like they were saying that like Southwest was impacted because they have a lot more of them, but all of the airlines were being impacted.
Right.
And then some of the people that they interviewed, some of them were like, well, it's still the safest way to travel, despite that.
Right.
So that's but other people could say, well, it makes sense.
If I think I have the solution. If we had the fantasy train, we could fly over the ocean, and we never have to worry about Boeing or any sort of airplane issues.
Right, it's
again.
just not hitting something on
Comes
the ground.
from AOC directly with the ideas.
Right.
So we have, what do we have in front of us?
Right. Well, that's the thing.
The different choices.
There's definitely crashes that can occur, but like you said, the train. I mean, you could hit something on the road.
I think
driving on the train.
I think right now that they're the idea that they've grounded them. How long are they going to ground them? And for me, it's let's see what the black boxes say, and then make the decision from there, and get these things back, and get people back to work, and get these people back to their regular way of living. But You can't be frightened all your life. That's just my thing.
No.
If I'm a firm believer, I'm a big believer, obviously. God has a plan for us, and if you're going to die by falling out of the sky, then there's not really much you can do for it, whether you're on a Boeing or you're on some other planet.
Right, because sometimes like the strangest things happen and people make it. Not so much on a
Right.
plane crash, but
Well-
other things. Like when you hear a story like some of their parachute didn't go open,
Right.
and they somehow lived, and you're like, what? How could that happen? They bounced.
I always loved that song. I can't remember. Back in the ironic. It's
Oh yeah,
It's ironic.
Even though a lot of people will say that Alanis Morissette that's ironic is not really irony; it's something else. But
regardless, I love the woman's voice. I think that particular song goes hand in hand with this.
Right.
You worry too much, and then you end up spiraling to your death from some other reason. So, okay, what's the next topic you got for me?
Well, the other thing that I thought that I saw was that whole rich parents buying their kids way into.
That broke my heart. I'm such a big fan of Murder, She Wrote, Matlock. I watch the Hallmark Channel religiously. I record those programs. Yes,
Right. Well,
I'm very busy, but I record the programs. And that show that the woman is from, without going into specifics, I love that show, the detective shows. And it broke my heart that she was tied in with that. Was it Miss
Laughlin? Yeah, she was on the Full House. So most
She
people
was.
Yeah. So other than the whole Hallmark Channel Christmas thing, yeah.
Yeah, well,
So, but it wasn't just her and her husband; it's other people.
but she's at the forefront, and of course they're probably going to use her as a scapegoat. But I'm not saying that she shouldn't be punished. I mean, that's horrendous that those people would use their pull to get their children into the schools and things like that.
Right. Well, and it
bypass all
wasn't
this
just
other ones.
them; it was some other person that was hiring coaches
Okay.
to try to offer like some type of something to the students to get them like to apply to different schools, or
Right.
they were having someone substitute in and take the ACT or SAT test for them,
Okay.
or they were working with the people that actually work for the school and helping them to get in that way.
Talk about the gall.
Right. So it was like not just one or two people. It was a big thing.
It's like a big ring.
Right,
Yeah,
and it's
that's-
just sad because, I mean, is that really helping your kid? I mean,
No.
we all want, kids to do great, but, working around the system's kind of wrong. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that had the scores, really fought to get into school, and
Right.
then they get discounted because, of this scandal, and then it,
So sad. I totally agree.
but, I don't know.
The whole situation is just disheartening to hear, but we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, it's just sad because I think of how many people are so excited when they get that letter saying that they've
Right.
been accepted, or heartbroken,
Mhm.
and so that just means that many more students that actually earned their spot got that heartbreaking letter that they didn't get in.
Right. You
know?
wonder if her family knew, or if this is a
Right.
secret, if they're just finding out now. I did see in the news that they were coming forward and supporting their mom, but to get that information,
Yeah.
you're thinking it's on your own merit.
Right.
We'll see how it turns out.
Right, and then that also shows like what does your parents actually think of you when they're willing to do that?
Right.
To, I mean they're thinking that you couldn't do well enough on the test, so they're
Right.
They're going around you and not letting you know.
Is that a mindset out there? Is that common?
Right.
Or out here in the Midwest? I don't see it so much.
I don't know. So other than that, I saw that there was this whole thing about Facebook. Did you see about the hours that they were down?
I experienced some of it myself.
Okay.
I know, I heard that, rumors that this is, you get the different tweets from everybody that say, if you don't have some sort of a blue link, if your profile doesn't turn blue, you will pay money, all these different things.
They always are saying that like
right.
you're going to pay money.
So for me,
in a
I
month.
just take them with a grain of salt.
Right. Well, a lot of people were over on Twitter, wondering about the outage, and people kept trying to log in. But some people are wondering if it's tied to the whole thing where they've been reviewed about the data breaches. I don't know if you've heard about the data breaches where supposedly Facebook has been sharing illegally people's private information without their knowledge. So all Facebook users, their personal private information, whether it's messages or
right.
etc., things that they posted online, is shared with many companies. For example, Amazon, the phone companies, Samsung and Apple, Sony, etc., and they're sharing the data and like selling it, so that way you could view what people looked at,
right,
or personal communications, pictures, whatever. And a lot of people think like it's private, but that's just showing that it's not. So I know that's been a big issue that was being looked at it, but it said there was 150 partners in total, and this is not just in the U.S., it's worldwide. And then there's the other thing that people have been complaining for months is that a lot of the conservative views are their Facebook live feeds have been not showing the likes that they normally should have.
I'll
They're not
literally
being
see
shared.
them disappear on mine.
Yeah, not being shared.
Definitely.
Or instead of being on the top when you just put it out as a feed, it's going lower in people's feeds.
I know they talk about the algorithms, this and that, but definitely I will see some of them actually disappear. I will, not only my likes, I'll see posts disappear, all sort of things. One of the other platforms out there that a lot of people don't know about is that MeWe.
Okay.
We actually have it around the curve table, MeWe.
Okay.
Join us on there. That is actually just kind of budding this past year. I know Doug Giles is on there with Worse and Wildman, one of my favorite podcasts in the world. And you can see them on there as well.
Other than that, I heard rumors that a new type of social media is like Spreely is supposed to be starting, where it's like
that's exciting.
Speak freely. So it will be that you always have the right to talk no matter what it is, as long as it's respectful and it's not violent.
That's what
it's that same kind of deal. So I don't know if that's another startup, but it seems like a lot of different companies are
that's
good
to
really
know there are
pushing
other options
things
out there,
right? Because a lot of people have problems with that, or even with YouTube.
Right, and to me that's one of those things. If the idea that they can steal your identity, and now that people are actually cashing in on people's IRS checks and things like that, get yourself a what's that, Lock Life or whatever it is. We won't say the name, but get yourself something to cover in case you do have some sort of ID fraud.
Oh yeah.
And I make sure that I had that for the past couple of years, especially being on the internet. They say, oh, you have been detected on the dark web.
Oh, I've had my name show up before.
I've
had my name show up before on the dark web. I got like, like my work. They mentioned that to me.
And I don't think it's as cool as it is on the show Arrow, which is also one of my favorites.
Oh, okay.
But it'll talk about that sort of thing. Because right now, I think this is being swept under the rug. Mm-hmm. That was it that new. I want to say it was New York Times. The writer, she called. She said she wanted to see white men suffer. She refers to the police and the white men she wants to see suffer. So with that sort of mentality out there,
right?
It's I can't imagine that being out there without actually opening up my voice, opening up my mouth, and telling all the other individuals out there, the young ladies that might be listening, this is
that's
ridiculous.
And that's the same thing. If you don't speak your mind politely,
as a lady,
then quietness is more like consent.
So Do you think that the children that are apprehended at the border that are in government, U.S. government care, whether it's a U.S. government agency or if it's a Catholic relief agency that's being contracted by the government, do you think like babies who are going to die should be resuscitated and be given care?
Yes.
Do you believe that like a baby who's born alive during an abortion at Planned Parenthood should get care?
No.
What's the difference? No, my question is, what is the difference? No, because I'm going to answer. I'm going to answer your question. I wrote down your points, but I want to know from you, what is the difference? Why do you care about a mom who's made a dangerous journey through Mexico, through Central America, put her life, her child's life at risk? Why do you care that we should use taxpayer dollars? So say she crosses the border, her child's severely malnourished, and her child is dehydrated, right? For example, my son was in the hospital last week with severe acidosis because of dehydration and could have died. So she comes across the border and she has a baby in her arms that's dying, right? Should we pay for that child's health care?
Yes.
If a child is born alive during an abortion procedure, because sometimes the abortionist misses the heart when they're administering the digoxin, should the abortionist have to provide health care to that child?
No.
Why?
Because they're performing an abortion. So before that, they've already determined that it's not a baby. I know you're telling me that science has determined one thing, but...
You just said they determined it's not a baby. How can an abortionist determine... How can an abortionist not determine it's not a baby? Excuse me, I'm dialoguing with her. How can an abortionist determine it's not a baby? Why is it not a baby? Is what I want you to tell me. Is why do you think it's not a baby?
It's a fetus.
It
hasn't been born yet.
But if it has been born, so if this baby comes out of utero and the digoxin hasn't been successful in inducing cardiac arrest, and this baby is alive,
well, first of all, I think that's a really rare occasion. Thank you. I think it's a really rare occasion. So I don't think it's all abortions, but...
It is rare, but it does happen because a group of abortion survivors were just at the White House. So it does happen. So do you think it's a baby?
No.
And look up some of these terms that we talked about today.
Geoengineering
We talked about geoengineering. Like I said, in this particular case, it was
Right.
Dane Winnington.
The environment, other than, that plan.
I would totally agree. I think Gabrielle especially made some great points this week. Well, one thing, it's not about my voice.
It's not about my voice.
Right. It's going on around us, and it's happening to our country. So at this point, I want to remind you ladies that are home viewing, get your circle of ladies together and
Get your coffee.
And make
Or
your
your wine
list.
glasses.
Get your list going, because there are important topics to talk about. Perhaps they shouldn't be talked about at the dinner table, or they're poo-pooed at the Thanksgiving table, that sort of thing. That doesn't mean you don't want to talk about it at all. Especially with ladies, you can be kind of shushed and pushed out of a conversation easily. In a case like this, I would say to not allow that to be your to be a crutch, and actually take it as a challenge and find your way, find your particular voice, find your way to speak your voice. The ladies around you are listening, especially the young ones.
Right. I mean, and that's the thing is, it's not, you want to have conversations with people. It's silly to be upset at what you see going on social media, the TV, etc., but not.
You're listening to
vocalizing
Around the
your
Curve
opinions with
Table.
other people, and then also if it's something that needs to be, let your representatives know.
Right. Sign up for some of those petitions online.
Right, and try to be, active. There's something that you can do, and it's just little steps like that. So, from there, we want to say thank you, right?
Oh, special thanks to Jamie Ullman for having us on.